Hi, I'm Selina and I'm Vince, and together we are going to show you the best way how to work with the solarROBOT Compact. There are a few notes before the training video. The first note is that watching the training video is in no way a substitute for reading the operating instructions. In addition, the video does not claim to be complete, and it is very important that no matter what we do, we always assume that the machine is used properly. So, enough with instructions, now we will first show you the module structure of the machine. So, let's put it together. So, Vince, now we have a few parts here. This is the centerpiece of the machine, so the chassis. You'll find the battery also in there. It's already placed in the machine right now. Then we have two drive units that come with the machine. Here we have a hose guide, which is attached up here. Then, of course, this is for the water supply. Then we do see two brushes down here because, of course, it's a cleaning machine. Then there is a brand new brush cover concept, which is hooked in with a KEDA rail we'll show you later in the video. The good thing is that you can simply reorder them if they get scratched. We do also have a charging station. This comes as a standard with every machine. We'll show you exactly how this works also later in a chapter. And of course, there are various traction pads, because these can be swapped individually, and we'll get to this later too. There are also various accessories, and again here we will cover at the end of the video. So Vince, let's start assembling the machine. Let's start with the chassis first. You can lift it yourself. The machine is designed so that you can just carry all the individual parts on your own, because no part is heavier than 10 kilos. So this means that we can achieve BG compliant ladder, because no part is heavier than the 10 kilo, but very important to say is that the compliant way to climb the ladder is not part of the training video, and that depending on which country you are cleaning in, you really need to find out which regulations apply there. But yeah, just to mention, bringing up the parts by the ladder is possible. So now we've got ourselves a tool here. Yeah, question from Vince is there a way to set up the machine without this kind of carriage with me? Yeah, so the transport trolley, you can order that as an accessory. Okay, all clear. Okay, now let's take the trolley and then we can each grab one drive. Then this is hooked into the chassis here. Then up and off you go. Now we can see a couple of connections here. One is for the brush and one is then for the drive. Now we can see that they are very different, so you cannot swap them because they simply wouldn't fit. And this one here comes screw on screw. We'll leave this one for now because the brushes are still missing. But yeah, let's move on with the brushes. You can all just grab one here. Then, yeah, the brush is also hooked into the front. It's very important to say, why do I hold it like this? Because these are not designed to be grabbed here. So always hold it by the side and then hook it in. So also these ones here are connected. Yeah, of course, you're right. This one here is yours. This one here is mine. And then I think it's best visible on your side.
Hier, komm mal rein. Hier rein, Klemme zu, fertig.
So, als nächstes willst du mit der Schlauchführung oder mit der...
Ich würde jetzt die Dinger hier
So now let's have a look at the brush cover.
Intuitiv.
Ja, jetzt machen wir hier unsere schönen Abdeckungen dran von hyCLEANER. Das läuft hier oben über.
So we will hook them with the KEDA up here at the top. And at the other side we have a Velcro
Da
tape.
können wir quasi einfach hier einfügen.
So we can insert this here.
So, dann hier auf Stoß und schön
Then you
runterziehen.
bring it to tension. You pull it down and that's basically it.
Top. Wenn die Dinger mal irgendwie nicht mehr so schick aussehen sollten oder...
If they wear off by time or, you know, they are quite dirty, then you can also reorder them. Then, of course, the hose guide. This one is placed on top here. And then we also want to show you how to use a crane hook. Later we can lift it onto the solar surface like that. And here you can see our water supply. It is here to manage our hose properly. The counterpart is attached here. And the good thing is that you can actually rotate it by 360 degrees, so it always moves towards where also the hose is going. Basically, hose management is a tricky topic, so especially if you have also cleaned with hand brushes, it's always difficult to manage the hose. So Vince wants to know what options do we have. We can add a hose reel to the machine, we will show that later. It's an accessory that I can attach to the surface with double sucker plates. It is always attached to the top of the solar surface and it really helps to guide the hose. Now Vince asks for the meters, it's 25 meters of hose. Now we already have our traction pads on there. We have different kind of driving pads. We will cover that later also in a separate chapter. But now we would actually like to put the standard pads on because these are only intended for dry cleaning. So let's take them off now. And Vince, I'll show you a great trick first. So for this we need the remote control. And we can already start showing how to switch on the machine. Now you have intuitively already pressed the button on the batteries. When you press the button, the LED displays give you an indication of how much battery you have left. So you can check that before you place it on the surface. About the batteries, of course, it's always that we want to have little downtime as possible. So Vince wants to know what is the best battery set and how long can I work with it. So one battery is always included as a standard, but we also recommend buying a separate spare battery so that you can always work continuously. So while one is charging, you can work with the other. I know what you're going to ask now. The charging time of the batteries is less than the battery runtime. So yes, you can work without disruption. So of course, the runtime always depends on how many accessories I use in terms of weight and also at which inclination level I work, all of which have an influence on the battery runtime, of course. But we are at about 2 hours per battery and charging time is about 1 hour 45. So it's always good to have a second one with you. There's also enough charging sockets on the charging box.
Alles mehr ist dann wirklich Unsinn, muss man einfach sagen.
Ja, da muss man noch eine zweite Ladebox kaufen. Super, okay. Ja, jetzt müssen wir natürlich auch noch die Funke verbinden. Zu dem Thema Funksteuerung kommen wir.
Okay, now we still have to connect the remote control. We'll explain about the remote control in detail later. So, we are now in the basic position. You press and hold for 2 seconds until something pops up in the display. Now I have to switch everything on first. I've done that already, so let's go a bit faster now. So now you can see, you can take this one. I'll do it then on the other side. It's just much easier to do it this way because of the Velcro, because I'm a bit elevated here. And you can see I also can do both at the same time. So one more trick, if you have equipped the edge detection and you are using the transport trolley, then the machine doesn't move now. So that's correct because the sensors are all triggered. The sensors are measuring the distance to the ground, and because my distance to the solar surface is naturally shorter than when I'm elevated on the transport trolley, so that's why it's supposed to stop, and it does. So now I need to oversteer. Simultaneously I press and hold the button and steer forwards, and then also the belts start moving. So now we come to the subject of our driving pads, in the sense that we now put the standard pads on the machine. So these are our leather pads. They come in a standard length. You can touch them, they're very hard now. So now we don't have grip. So the leather pads, they always have to be wet to have grip. That's why we now use our bucket, which comes with the standard set. There's also a pad cleaner in there, as you see. Of course, this one is to actually clean them after they're dirty. Example would be ammonia, but to be honest, in this case, our rubber belts are actually better suited. So now we put them in the bucket, and if you look into it, you see that bubbles are rising. This is also what we want, because now they are soaking up with water, and we wait until they are gone. So then you always just take a bit of them, you put your foot on it, and then you just keep pulling. If you place it better than me into the bucket, then it also works a little bit better. So, but now we sort of wring it. And yes, once is enough if we just want to soak them. If we use it with the pet cleaner though, then they need to soak in there. It's written in the back, and then we also have to rinse them afterwards with normal water, and the water also should be warm. Very important is that whenever you put the pad on, that you put it on there with tension. So I just take a starting point. I will pull it very, very slowly. And then I pull and I pull. Because what we don't want in the end is to have bumps in the pad.
Ja, kannst weitermachen. Wir wollen am Ende natürlich keine Hubbel haben, dass das immer schön alles gerade drauf ist. Und jetzt seht ihr, jetzt ist das ein bisschen zu lang. Das ist standardmäßig so, weil jeder...
And now you can see that it's just a little bit too long.
So, wie machen wir das?
And so we are now shortening it ourselves. We take a standard scissor for this. Very important is that you always cut in front of a seam and that you don't cut on the seam. So just a side note, our dog always keeps to play with it and it's just not destroyable. She just doesn't manage. So now let's look at the charging station. For this we will take the battery with us and you just pull this out here. So now let's talk about the charging station. This is our charging station. The cool thing is that it is a Stanley box, so you can always add more boxes on top. For example, if you want to store some spare parts or some tools, then you just buy a second one and you put it on top. Very important, here we have another short operating instruction for many important points when using our machine. So you just basically open it here. So this is a USB-C for charging the remote control. Yeah, the other one, that is a cigarette lighter next to it. This one is for charging the remote of the solarROBOT Pro. So it does have a different remote control, but in the end it's the same charging station. And you could theoretically use it for both machines. But yeah, each machine gets its own. So then, Vince, we have another cable that we need to connect to the Stanley box. The connection you can find here at the back. And then, of course, even though it sounds a little bit funny, but important, you have to put it to the power socket, of course. Then we also send a load securing strap where you can strap it then for the transportation of the box. Then the batteries go into the holder here. And now important, if you want to charge fast, then you switch them on. You can see that the LEDs here are blinking or are red. So if it's full, then it's green, and if it flashes, then there's a fault, and then you just go check the operating instructions. Yeah, question of Vince, is it waterproof? So it's a good point, it is splash proof. If it rains, then you have to close the lid. It doesn't have to be left open the whole time because it does have a ventilation on the side. It's important also that you don't charge it in direct sunlight. And when it comes to batteries in the winter, then we recommend to do a little battery jogging. So you have to charge and discharge them from time to time so that you prevent them from becoming deeply discharged during the winter break. And otherwise, you have to store them frost-free. That's similar like you have to do for the machine. So, let's move on to the next topic.
Ja, Platz hier alle weg.
Hast du noch Fragen zur Ladestation?
Nee.
Super, dann können wir jetzt schon zum nächsten Thema kommen.
So, now we get to the subject of maintenance. There is one point at the machine that needs to be checked from time to time. This is regarding the chain tension and the parallelism of the wheels. To do this, you need a 19mm open-end wrench, a folding rule, and something to measure the parallelism, for example, a water level. So, now we can take the folding rule, and then we measure here how far it is from this one to the top point. The distance should be 10 centimeters, so here it's perfectly fine. If it doesn't fit, then we take our 19mm wrench
19er Maulschlüssel nehmen.
And then you can see here at the bottom that you have two screws. One is down here and one is at the top. And then with the 19er wrench, you can move it up or down depending on the direction. You do the same also with the lock nut, and you move it up and down until you reach the 10 centimeters.
Das kannst du dann tatsächlich weiter hoch oder weiter runter machen, bis du deine 10 Zentimeter hast.
Alright, and then have a look at the parallelism. We will do this over there with another chassis. We also need a folding rule, a 2mm and a 3mm Allen key. To check the parallelism, we now take the folding rule and we measure it from the wheels to the side. And here we always to be at 5 centimeters, and of course we do this from all the sides. Okay, perfect. I have my 5 centimeters everywhere, so it's now perfectly adjusted. It should normally stay like this, but however, it has to be checked before every use. And if it's not the case, then we need a 3mm Allen key to remove the cover here. And since it's a bit simpler to just go to the other side, let's have a look at these little headless screws, which we loosen then with a 2mm Allen key. And then we can realign the wheels with the slightly loosened axles. And of course, after we're doing this, then we again need to check the 5 centimeters and we tighten everything back together, and then you're done. Okay, so let's get to the next important topic. It's about the commissioning and the mode of operation. There are a few tips and tricks for you. Firstly, it's about the operating temperature. This one should be between 5 and 60 degrees. We also have to put this into relation to our driving pads. So the gray leather driving pads can be used from 5 degrees, while the rubber pads, they only start from 10 degrees. It just simply has to do with the rubber. We can compare that to tires. And the next thing is the wind force. So we must not clean at wind speeds of more than 6. This one is comparable to 40 to 50 kilometers per hour. And then, of course, there's the questions we are often asked: what is the angle of inclination that I'm allowed to clean at? Very important is, before you clean, you have to take a very close look at the surface condition. So it is approved up to 20 degrees inclination with these leather pads. With the rubber pads, it is 15 degrees. The very decisive factor, however, is what kind of surface and what condition it is in. So if you're cleaning, for example, on a cowshed with lots of ammonia, you may not be able to achieve 20 degrees with the machine. That has to be assessed individually on each installation before you operate. How can I measure this? Because you simply can't see it. There are various measuring devices or apps that you can use for this. And the mostly frequently asked question, also Vince says, no matter which robot, it's always what slope or what inclination. By the way, an interesting factor is also the machine weighs 50 kilos that we haven't discussed yet. Okay, so next one, we have to be very careful with ammonia. Let's also look into work safety in general. We always say rope up the machine. There are various points where you can do this. Here, for example, is a safety point. It's also our point for the crane hooking. To continue now, let's lift it on the surface. So one more thing that I have forgotten, very important, the machine is equipped with the clean driving pads now, and I want to keep my grip, so it's recommended to clean the first 2 panels in advance, so that we do not place the machine on the dirt. And what's also very important is that if you have the edge detection as an accessory, then you also must check the sensors before putting it up on the panels. More to this also in the accessories chapter. So now, Vince, you can go ahead, because I really know that you enjoy it. Perfect, so we have this available here now. Outside in the field, you can also use this hook to work with boom lifts, or it's also very handy to actually pull it with a trolley. So I just got this here for you as an example.
Eingehakt und oben quasi zum Beispiel an den Arbeitskorb dran gemacht. Genau. Ist auch übrigens gut
Okay, so we placed the machine on the top now. It has the advantage that I can start working from the right height. It makes sense that I always clean from the top to the bottom, because otherwise my dirty water runs over the already cleaned surface, right? So when I clean with a work platform, I try to position the work platform in that way that I can reach the top before. If I use a ladder, then, for example, of course I can still pre-clean at the bottom, place the machine at the bottom and drive up through the dirt.
Aber besser für die Laufbänder ist es natürlich immer, wenn ich das ganz nach oben direkt hinstelle.
Okay, so before we start driving, let's explain also the remote control. We will now set the whole thing to the basic position and want to explain each button in more detail. So we have a display, which we have to push up for the on and the off switch. Then there are a few other buttons here at the back. This is, for example, for the drives. Then this is the emergency stop. That means whenever I want the machine to stop and everything to close, then I press or push down this emergency stop. But to start the machine, it always has to be set in a neutral position. Otherwise, I get a default on the remote. Then we have the brushes. The brush to the left, to the right, or front or back. Then these sliders, they're also for the brushes to determine the brush rotation. I can set this between 0 and 100% so that I can also only give half the power, for example. So off again to be able to start the remote later. And then here we have the speed, low and fast. And to start, first we need to put it in the downwards position. And here there's the joystick to drive forwards, backwards or sideways, depending on the mode. So talking about the modes, we do have different modes that you can see at the bottom here. They also light up whenever they are switched on. There is, for example, the fast driving. So when I change the lane without cleaning, then this default setting is at full speed. Then there's also normal mode, so that's the actual cleaning mode, which is a little bit slower. So I can still vary in the speed, but I still have to adjust it. Then the same again on the other side. You might ask the question, why do we actually have 4 and not 2 buttons? That's because we have different driving directions, so forwards or backwards. And you know, in the past there were actually customers who took the remote control and they switched it around so that they could drive back in the same direction. So then we started to say, let's introduce buttons that take this rethinking out of the equation so that I can invert the direction. So for example, I drive forwards, I reach the edge, and I can drive forwards again, even though I'm driving in the other direction. And next, we do have the edge detection. There's the SF button for this. It's actually for bridging the edge detection. So I press it, I hold it, and I steer forwards and backwards again to cross, for example, an aisle. With edge detection, it's basically the case that if I don't press the SF, I can only drive in the direction in which I'm driving away from the edge. If I drive in the same direction, it just simply won't drive. For that, I need to bridge. But very important note, you always have to release this F button again because it deactivates the edge detection, and as long as I hold it pressed, then the machine can actually also fall off the roof. So now let's switch on the robot here. So you slide up the display, you press the on and off button, and until the logo appears, press OK. Then there are error messages if I don't pay attention to these basic positions. So for example, the buttons are down instead of up, then the remote control informs me about that. I have various information in my display, for example, the battery of the remote control itself. I have information about the brushes, brush 1 or brush 2. They are the same as the buttons, and they also tell me 0% when they're off, 100% when they're on, and I can switch them on now. Then we can see this here, and now you can also hear this. And then here, where we see the 100 or 99%, I can gradually turn it down.
runterregeln kann. Das sagt mir die Funke dann auch.
Battery here with the robot, of course, that's the battery status of the robot itself, and also issues a warning. So at 20%, at 10%, and at 5%, there's a warning. At 5%, also they switch off the brushes. That is just safety to spare some batteries so that you can also find the way back and replace the battery before you just break down in the middle. There's a first start display, then there's also a second one, and here you can also, for example, see your edge detection. And up here it shows me that I have the fast mode on. It also tells you this. So it basically always tells you which one you have selected. Then there are also some control buttons, but to be honest, we don't really use them, so we don't go into detail. Otherwise, every button is also explained in the operating instruction. So we now have intentionally made a few mistakes in the basic position. So for example, we accelerated from the start, the brushes are running, and now if we switch it on, we can see that there are various errors appearing. So also the remote tells us which buttons are affected by this. So if you now put them all in the right direction or position, then the warning disappears. So I undo them all now, and we're all set basically. One more button is the SE button. It's basically a reset button, so it's a protective mechanism that the machine has in case, for example, it goes into its limits because, for example, the hose gets stuck or tangled, then the machine goes into a timeout. This one is for 7 seconds until it expires, and once it expired, then you have to press the button so that the machine can operate again. This is simply a safety mechanism for the machine.
Es ist so, dass ich dann, wenn diese 7 Sekunden vorbei sind, diesen Knopf einmal drücken muss, bevor ich wieder weiterfahren kann.
We have now connected the water, because with the small robot we still have to turn or switch on the valve to switch on the water. We have already turned on the water, so it'll just start right away. Here's the valve, and you flip it up, and then you can also already hear the water running.
Wasser kommt.
We switch on the robot like we explained before, battery on, remote on, and then off we go. Now Vince is just on the subject of maintenance corridors, and he just drives towards it. And now there's the edge detection. Machine does what it's supposed to do, it stops. So now what you need to do is basically to override the machine. And how many centimeters you can override, it depends on the angle of inclination, here at 20 centimeters. But now you can simply drive over it. Once again, he presses DSF and accelerates. Another thing you can see is the immersion depth of the brushes. It should always be immersed by 2 centimeters. You can also see that clearly now at the front brush. One more hint, you have been staying on one spot with the brush for a very long time. Please keep in mind that these are rotating brushes, so for example if you go for smoking breaks or phone calls, then switch off the brush, because otherwise you're really polishing this one spot for the whole time. So we will switch off the water now. Then of course we are now turning off the valve. Of course if I want to do dry cleaning, then of course I just simply don't connect it to the water. So one more topic, we will see this now here. Please mind these clamps that you see here that holds the panels together. If you turn the robot on these clamps, then the belts could shear off. So this is very important to just have a look at this. The last point on the subject of the mode of operation is the hose. We always have an advantage if the hose is guided from the top. Otherwise, additional load is actually pulling the robot downwards. And that of course is an issue for tilt and for the grip. So when I also work with the hose reel, for example, we always place it on the top of the panels, if I can reach it, of course, and ideally also my hose is always guided from above. But that's important to remember, the hose is not a safety leash for the machine. Right, then we are getting to the topic of the brush adjustment. So we have the option to adjust the height. One reason for this is that we have different driving pads. For example, our rubber pads, they are bigger or a little bit higher than the leather pads. So if you want to clean with those, I have to adjust the brush height. Or if my brush doesn't have the right immersion depth, which we saw earlier, then we have to adjust the brush as well. So you can see that here now. If you move the robot a little bit back, then we can see how much the brushes are immersed here. Normally you can see that with your finger, but I'm going to look at this now with a folding rule. Just makes it a little bit easier. So we want them to sink in for 2 centimeters. So that's actually quite good here. But yeah, the one at the back is a little bit too deep.
Das heißt aber, dass diese da hinten eigentlich schon zu tief eingestellt ist, ne? Ja, da sehen wir auch hier den Effekt.
So here now we can see the effect of the 2 centimeters dipping in. The second topic is that I can also set the brushes into an offset position. This means that the brush, which is usually 800 millimeters, can also be set to 1100 millimeters of width. The only thing that you need to consider is that one of the drives does not run on a pre-cleaned surface, so that's why we recommend cleaning with the rubber pads, because as explained earlier, I want to keep the leather pads clean for the optimum grip. Alright, let's show you how you do this. For this we need some tools. So the robot is already on the surface here. We need a 10 millimeters open-ended wrench and a 5 millimeters Allen key.
Ein 10er Schlüssel und ein 5er Imbus.
We can see 4 screws here, and these ones we need to loosen. Because we see that we have slotted holes here, so that means you can move then the brush up or down. In this case we need to move it downwards, because you have gained more clearance here. So first, let's loosen all the screws.
Und dann ziehen wir die Schrauben einfach wieder an. So, also wir haben jetzt hier die Schrauben einmal alle angelöst. Ja, auf dieser Seite 4 Stück, auf dieser Seite 4 Stück. Und jetzt kann ich eben, wenn ich hier die beiden Träger runterdrücke...
Now we can push these fixtures down and we can adjust it continuously where we need it. Then we can check again with the folding rule. See, now we do this, so myself. Yeah, we can see that this is way too much, because this is already at 3 centimeters. So then we just put it a little higher, then we tighten everything again, and we are done with the adjustment of the brush. Important is that we always need to do this with the second brush too, not only with one of them, of course. Alright, check again how we have adjusted the brush. Here we do have an inclination level, and actually earlier we did not have the best position. So you can see with the slope that this is coming up a little more on the right than on the left. So Vince adjusts it again before we move on.
Macht Vince die jetzt hier nochmal ein bisschen höher, damit wir die auf allen Seiten gleich eingestellt haben. So, jetzt haben
okay, now that they are optimally adjusted, we want to show the offset arrangement. To do this, we just take down the brush and we take it with us. For this, we need the same tools that we have earlier. So here we now see a screw. And this one we can move to the outer hole. And we do have that twice, and we can decide which one we want to use. And then we take this fixture, move it to the new holes that we decide, and we screw it back in. So now then we hook the brush back in, and you can see actually how the brush moves further to the right. And if we were to do this with the other side, we do get the offset also there, and we reach our desired 1100 millimeters. That's it for this chapter. Let's talk a little more about the driving pads. So we mentioned earlier that there are different driving pads. So now we'll tell you a little bit more about them. So we lined them up for you here. We have the leather pads on the top, the one from the very beginning, the neoprene one for dry cleaning. And then we have our rubber pads.
Und dann haben wir noch unsere Gummibänder. Das ist jetzt hier einfach mal ein Teilstück.
That is just one of the sections here. We need 6 of those usually. So, what do I use the different ones for? We've already mentioned that this is for the dry cleaning. This one here is really the pad that we always recommend because it just has the highest grip. However, it's very important that I always look after it, and for exactly this reason, there is another pad, our rubber pads, and if I'm cleaning a very dirty surface, then it's advisable to clean with the rubber pads, depending of course on the inclination level, because then I can drive through the dirt without having to worry about the dirty pads too fast compared to the leather one. So that's the only difference, plus there are other temperature zones in which the pads can be used, so the rubber bands at 10 degrees and the leather pads already at 5 degrees. So let's get to that one because it needs the most care. With the rubber ones I can simply remove the dirt when I see it with water. With this one it's a bit of a different thing to consider. So I have introduced the bucket earlier, I've also mentioned the pad cleaner. This one is there to actually clean the pads. So you use half of the bottle, you put it into the cleaning bucket with warm water. Important thing is that it's never too hot water because very important, as the pads loosen their structure and their material is destroyed if I wash it above 30 degrees. Also important, if we are talking about washing in general, then I can do this with the pad cleaner in the bucket or also put it into the washing machine, but also here pay attention to the water temperature and that you don't put it in the conventional washing machine where we also wash other things, because there are surfactants as residues in there and they make the whole thing greasy. And that's why there's a surfactant-free cleaner. It says what to do on the back, so you simply pour it in, clean the pads, leave it for 30 minutes and then you clean it with fresh water. One more important point, this which, you know, not just applies to the pads but also to all the other components of the machine. Never clean anything on the machine with a high pressure cleaner. One last point, the number of square meters that you can use these pads for, no matter which ones, it always depends on the square meters that I have cleaned. At some point they will wear off and they will lose their grip. So in case of the leather pads, for example, that is 20,000 square meters and then you can reorder them. Okay, that's everything you need to know about the pads. Let's have a look at the storage now. When it comes to storage, it is important that the driving pads do not dry on the drives on the machine, because you remember they need to be wet. The way you can see it in my background is the optimum storage, because the pads get shorter when they become dry, and keeping them on the machine destroys the structure of the material and makes it crack. Therefore, simply don't store it on the machine. Otherwise, on the subject of storage, we mentioned it earlier, there's another issue with frost. I mean, sure, we do have water hoses in the machine, so no water residue should come into contact with frost. That means don't store your machine in frosty conditions. The other topic is batteries. You should not store them in the machine, especially not over the long winter break. Earlier we have already talked about battery jogging, so for example charging and discharging the battery over time. Then the driving pads, they should always be clean, so don't put them on a dirty floor. And if I'm not storing the machine on the transport trolley, then I have to make sure that another trolley isn't slippery. Another important point about the storage is the storage of the bristles. It's very important that they are not stored on the top of the bristles, but rather inverted around them, because otherwise the bristles will simply lose their shape. Alright, that's it on the subject of storage. So let's take a look at the water connections. This is a topic that we get often asked about. Which ones do I need and what do I need it for? So we already supply a few with the robot, but we would like to give you a few more tips around this. So the inner diameter of the hoses that go through the robot is 10 millimeters. It is therefore always recommended and important to say that hoses that are led to the machine, where the water supply goes through, rule of thumb is the diameter should always have more than 10 millimeters. Anything bigger is better, particularly on ground-mounted installations where you have hundreds of meters of hose. Bigger is always better. Then there's the issue of water pressure. The solarROBOT Compact can handle 2 to 8 bar. And what else do I have? The water temperature should not be more than 60 degrees going through the robot. The water consumption is between 4 to 6 liters per minute. And then again, coming to the connections that we supply, Vince is giving you a little introduction. So basically, we deliver these 3 different connections. This one is for a 3/4 inch hose. The adapter is the same for every one of those. Always for the connections to the robot, right? So 3/4 inch, this one here is a 1/2 inch hose. This one was already used here. It's just plugged in. Then we have kind of a bumper edge on each adapter up to which we push in the hose. And yeah, we're currently using this adapter here, for example, on the hose reel above, where we have a 1/2 inch screw-in thread. We screw it in, and then we're basically ready to go. Okay, we do also have some accessories and a few tips and tricks that we want to provide. We've already covered the edge detection before. It's very important for me to say again that with the edge detection you do have to check before each operation that all sensors are working. So I cannot perform this check on the surface as I already have the ideal distance to the surface, and we do use ultrasonic sensors here, so on all 4 edges they will not be triggered. So you can see the sensors here to all 4 edges. If I hold my hand underneath it, you can see this LED turns orange because it says, okay, yeah, there's an edge. And then now it says, oh, I'm stopping because I've got no surface underneath. So what this means is we need the robot to be slightly elevated before we check this. So now I have my ready remote control here, and I slide to the display where I see the edge detection. There's an edge direction 1, edge direction 2. And we do see 4 fields. And now I hold my hand underneath each sensor and I check if there's a 1 at the field. So this one at the top right, I see functional. To do the same at the back, we see down there, yes, also functional. So Vince, if you can do this on the other side, we can also see that this one is also functional and the last one also. So, very important to check that they're all functioning as intended, because otherwise it might fall off the roof. It may be stupid to mention this, but I'll do it anyway. Please don't take the sensors, because then they also won't work. Then we have the hose reel here with handy double sucker plates. This means we can use them to put them on the solar surface. So I basically take these and I can attach them to these 3 different sides here. And now I have to be very strong lifting them up to the surface because that's one of the heaviest parts. Here again, we place it to the top because otherwise, yeah, it will pull down the robot. And then we attach the sucker plates here. Then, yeah, we can connect it, and there again, you have to find the right one from the connections. So then, next one is a handy bag for the radio remote control, and this Vince will introduce. So, yeah, we will see some rain from time to time. The remote control is not waterproof, so we can now put the radio remote control in here. And we put our hands inside. In here there's a loop which we can put around the remote control. And now we can clean even though it rains.
Der Punkt ist nämlich, dass die Fernbedienung nicht wasserdicht ist. Heißt, wenn ihr Wasser hier dran lasst, dann am besten...
And actually also a nice hand warmer, right?
Ist auch ein schöner Handwerk. Genau.
Okay, another accessory is basically cleaning with our Osmobile, in case we want to clean with technical water, and Vince will tell a bit more about this.
Und dazu möchte euch Vince ganz gerne noch mal ein bisschen was erzählen über das Osmobile selber.
Yeah, it simply makes sense to clean a solar system with pure water. Otherwise, we would always have limescale residues on the surface. And this brings us to the Osmobile Pro X that you can see here from our partner hyCLEANER. There is a video about the system with all kinds of data, application reports, how you set it up and take it down, and of course what you need to keep in mind when working with it. A brief summary: we have up to 450 liters of clean water per hour, so it's enough for the solarROBOT Compact. And the connections is very simple. You have the city water connected down here, the hose goes out at the front, then with the hose directly to the robots, or again here, suitable adapter. Or option 2 is we first go to the hose reel and connect it down here. So there's the connection, and this one again goes to the robot. So that's it on the subject of clean water. So great, thanks a lot. We hope that we covered all the questions. Otherwise, there's an operating instruction. Please read it and ask if you have questions. And yeah, ciao, thanks for listening.
Ciao, danke euch.